Now, let's return to our top story. Andy Burnham, of course, he's delivered his first speech as Labour leader. He's promised the most significant change in our politics for 40 years. Well, let's now catch up with our very own Anna Mikhailova, our political editor here at Times Radio. She has been at that special conference in London. She joins us now. Hello, Anna.
Hi, Ayesha.
So what did you get from his speech? You know, you've been in the hall, you've heard the chatter. What's the takeaway from what he said?
I think the main takeaway is by starting out praising Keir Starmer, trying to be collegiate on that front, he then set out some pretty ambitious things that he says he wants to change. And, you know, they are not incremental. These are things like doing politics differently, getting rid of factionalism. These are giant promises if you think about it. And I mean, the people in the room really like what they heard. They wanted what they see is a different change of pace, of direction, and a big break, a clear break from Keir Starmer's leadership. But today is the very easy bit. Today is the part where he hasn't had to specify anything in particular. He can say that all of that is coming next week, particularly with the appointment of cabinet. And it's from Monday, when that happens, that things will start to get a lot more tricky.
Yeah, it very much felt like today is like the sort of peak of the honeymoon in terms of, you know, everybody being very giddy and happy in the conference hall, and it did feel like it was quite a speech for the Labour Party rather than the outside country. But as you say, next week we are going to get more flesh on the bone, and he's going to announce some of those big ministerial positions and junior jobs, and probably by about Thursday of next week there will actually be quite a lot of people who are grinning away today, but they'll be quite disappointed when they don't get a job. How do you think he's going to manage that next week?
Well, that's the big question. I did manage to speak to Jonathan Reynolds, the chief whip, after the speech. And one interesting thing he said was that he thinks there's a way. I asked him this very point that, you know, is it going to be harder to keep people together when you've had to tell them they're not in a job? And Jonathan Reynolds said that there are ways of doing reshuffles. There are ways of breaking those kind of bad news to people. And that, you know, if you step back, that's quite an interesting comment, because one of the big criticisms of Keir Starmer and the way he handled these things was that he was, you know, too detached. He often didn't make the calls personally to either sack people or appoint people. And the expectation is that Andy Burnham would have the deftness and political skills to be able to handle that side of the job a lot better. And you do hear that from MPs, people who are in the room. They think that he will be given a bit more leeway purely because he is better at that side of politics.
Well, I suppose the proof will be in terms of how that all plays out. But it is certainly true that the Parliamentary Labour Party is littered with people who have not got the best experiences of their sort of interactions with the Prime Minister and his team. But look, there's a lot of focus, Anna, on who might be Chancellor. You know, it's basically between Shabana Mahmood and Ed Miliband. A lot of briefing in the last sort of 48 hours that Shabana Mahmood looks like she's more likely to get it. Although I did speak with somebody quite close to Andy Burnham's team today, who this morning before I came on air, who said, you know, it's not done until it's done, and, you know, he's the one that makes the final decision, and that Ed Miliband is not out of the running yet. What are you picking up from chatting and gossiping to people in the hall today?
So in the hall, some of the MPs said they were quite fed up with the briefings and counter briefings, that they said they want a stop to that this weekend, which is obviously slightly ironic, because that is the kind of, that is exactly the sort of thing Andy Burnham says he wants to be done with. I think, you know, it was curious to see him say that he still hasn't made his mind up about the big jobs. He again wanted to land that. And I asked Jonathan Reynolds about that as well, because obviously the chief whip knows a thing or two about reshuffles. And the point he made was that can very much be true purely because reshuffles often don't go to plan. So you could offer someone something and they might say, no, I don't want to do that. So you often have to have a couple of plan Bs, plan Cs up your sleeve. And I think without saying the obvious, what he's hinted out there is we could well see a situation where Ed Miliband has offered something, says, no, I'm not going to do that, and then they have to quickly turn to whatever plan B they have, whether that means shuffling people around again and moving those jigsaws around, or whether it means having to say to someone who doesn't want the job that they're being offered, that fine, go to the backbenchers then.
Look, this is a cliche, but he will never be stronger as he will over the next week in terms of the potency of his power as a new leader, with the power of patronage and being able to appoint people to these top jobs. He has to make the decision that he wants to. Now, it's just interesting what you said there. If Ed Miliband says no, what will happen? Isn't there a danger that if he offers people jobs and they don't take it, that's almost kind of weakening his leadership right from the start? This should be probably the one time where he says, it's my way or the highway, because this is him at his most strong, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. But things don't often go to plan. But I think you're right. I think the way that he managed to win Makerfield and the way that the subsequently wasn't a leadership contest that he had to fight, which means that he isn't beholden to factions of the party. He hasn't had to make those kind of promises either to individuals, because he was less reliant on any one kingmaker, and similarly to those groups of MPs who would have wanted some sort of pledge. He hasn't had to make those promises, so he is in a very strong position right now, going into this first set of appointments. And his supporters think that if he can continue, if he can handle that right, then he can get the party behind him. What the question I've been asking today for the people in the room, who are obviously all gathered because they're supportive, and it's only the supportive ones, who would attend. I've asked them, how much patience do you think he will see from both the public and his party? And every single one of them said 2 years, 2.5 years, until whenever the next election date is. But we all know that that's not the case, because the public expects results very quickly these days. There is very little patience for politicians and promises not delivered when they've been made. And also, the MPs also, it'll be very interesting to see whether, come the autumn, everyone manages to row behind, because they know that they've done a very big thing in changing leader. And as Andy Burnham very clearly said to them, this is the last chance. He has repeated that message again. Or whether they start doing what they do, which is rebelling and asking for every single policy that they want, and expecting it, and expecting compromises where there are none. And how is that going to interact as well with Andy Burnham's claim that he is not going to run the party in the way that Keir Starmer ran it? So he again said today he's not going to just kick people out for disagreeing. But while there is a lot of consensus that Keir Starmer's approach and Morgan McSweeney's approach was a bit too heavy-handed and did not actually help them in the long run, that is also a key bit of party management, being able to have that, as a threat to MPs for them to stay in line.
Absolutely. Well, look, Anna, really good to catch up with you. Thanks very much for your time. I know it's a very busy day for you, and very interesting commentary there. And I think one other thing that I'm sort of really struck by. There was interesting content there. Working class, social care, outside London, last chance, all of that. But what wasn't in his speech is really interesting as well. There was very little, in fact nothing, I think, on foreign policy. And if you look at what's happening right now, talked about Ukraine, overnight tensions between Iran and America are rising again. It doesn't, very, very much back at war. That's going to have big, big consequences for the global economy. It may well be that the beginning bit of his time next week, he will have to go in and get big briefings on all the international affairs. So that is very striking that he did not touch on international. I think that, sometimes you have to look at what's in a speech, but also look at what isn't in a debut speech as well.